Hey everyone, welcome to Geeking Out, the podcast in which we dive into the career journeys of some of the amazing humans in tech and geek out on topics like software development, DevOps, observability, reliability, and everything in between. I'm your host, Adriana Villela, coming to you from Toronto, Canada. And geeking out with me today, I have Deana Solis. Welcome, Deana.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And where are you calling from?
I'm in Vancouver, Washington.
Oh, cool! That's awesome. So before I intro you in, we were talking about pronouncing names, and I thought it was interesting, so I wanted to bring it up on the podcast because I thought your name was pronounced Deanna, but it's actually Deana. And tell the story behind that because I thought it was kind of cool.
I had always blamed this on my dad because I knew the story. They were Rat Pack fans, and Dean Martin was a favorite. My dad was a big audiophile. We had his records, so I just blamed him. It turns out that my mom was the big Dean Martin fan. She picked the name, and had I been a boy, I would have been Dean. But I wasn't. So, you know.
That is so cool. I love that. That's such a great name origin story.
But considering my last name, and you pronounced that exactly correctly, um, it's perfectly acceptable to expect to pronounce it Deanna or Deanna with all the syllables, but it's not. So
Yeah, fair, fair. Well, I mean, I think it's a really great way to remember though. In terms of pronouncing your name, I'm like, oh, I always think of like the Dean Martin reference. That's awesome. Well, so are you ready for our icebreaker questions?
yes,
Okay, first question: are you a lefty or a righty?
lefty.
Yeah. I always get you if you watch the show, I always get excited about lefties. Were you ever did anyone ever try to force you to write right-handed when you were growing up or like try to change anything about your leftiness?
Fortunately, in that area, no. However, I am somewhat ambidextrous, like in sports. I think
Mhm.
I'm somewhat ambidextrous. I throw right-handed. In basketball, you wouldn't know which I favor. But in baseball, I would left because
Ah.
coaches told me that was an advantage. Um,
Mhm.
and so I could adapt, and I had to throw right-handed because in my first couple of years of that sport, I didn't buy my own glove. I got the hand-me-down. I'm the youngest
Oh.
four. So, and also, I am disproportionately surrounded by other left-handers.
Oh, no way. That is super cool.
Yeah, my partner and his oldest son, my best friend's husband. Yeah, it's just funny.
Wow. One comment I was going to make because you said that you're like ambidextrous for certain things. I tend to be left-handed for most things, but for whatever reason, archery. Not that I have done archery often, but when I've picked up a bow and arrow, I do it the right-handed way, and my daughter, who's right-handed, does it the left-handed way.
Oh, that's interesting. My son's an archer.
Oh, really? That's cool.
He's done that thing where he has hit the bullseye and then split it with his next arrow.
He can do that.
I don't know how close he was, but even at close distance, that's not easy to do. And I'm I'm kind of proud of that. I had nothing to do with it.
That is a cool skill. Just on one more thing, one more curiosity on the left-handed thread. Do you mouse left or right-handed?
Oh, well, so I don't. What is it? Trackpad? What do you call it?
Yeah, trackpad. Do you trackpad left or right-handed?
I think mostly right.
Me
Mostly right.
too. Yeah,
Yeah.
me too. I tried like because that's how I learned. Like when a mouse was presented to me, and my dad's the techie in the family, so he
Mhm.
introduced me to a mouse, and I'm like, so I picked it up with my right hand, and I could not even fathom using a left-handed mouse.
Do you do like multiple monitors?
Eh, sometimes.
So I have found that when I'm moving windows around, or yeah, windows from one monitor to another, or just from one side of the screen to another, and I tend to be a two-handed trackpad.
Oh.
And you can, continue to swipe while you're without letting go of a
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
And I wish I could teach it, but I don't know how I do it.
I've done that on occasion, not necessarily with dragging monitors, but like I know what you're talking about. It comes in handy. Do you prefer iPhone or Android?
I think that I can adapt to either one, but I've owned far more iPhones. But hopefully, my frequency of changing them is much less. And I'd be open to trying one of the Androids because I have seen some really new, interesting products, but I'd probably get like a couple of generations old one.
Okay, next question. Do you prefer Mac, Linux, or Windows?
I don't think I could live without all three because I
Fair.
do quite a bit in the Azure space. And so being closer to the Microsoft ecosystem, um, and all my keyboard shortcuts that are muscle memory are from Windows. Uh, and I love my Mac. It's a design thing, but it's kind of a privilege to be able to answer that question at all. Um,
Ooh,
and
that's such a good. Yeah, that's I like that.
and the Linux thing, all the workloads that scale and that I'm that my clients are using, I wouldn't have a job if there weren't a ton of Linux workloads. I haven't been on a Linux desktop since 1999. So that was when it pretty much lost its like shine as a personal um uh operating system for me, but I will say that I still have my last Windows laptop from a few years ago that, it can't be updated anymore. And
Yeah.
I keep it around thinking, hey, just maybe I could just put a Linux OS on there and give it a new life.
Ooh, yes. That sounds like a fun little side project.
Yeah. In all my free time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Gotta find that time first, right? Okay, next question. Do you have a favorite programming language?
I do not. I think I told you I never contributed any code to an open source project, or I generally don't write it. Maybe policies, some YAML things, and edit existing Python scripts, but I'm more, since I have an app ops background, I'm more comfortable with Python, or um, I think I tried to learn Ruby, and then the project that I was specifically learning it for completely changed directions in terms of like the whole pipeline, the whole tool chain changed. And it was like, okay, drop that, learn this. And then also your role is going to change because we really need someone to know about this particular skill set. And so it was just more in my wheelhouse and didn't go back to it. I just always sort of thought, okay, I'm going to finish that beginner Python course, but I don't need it to do the job that my role is defined for.
Right. That's cool. That's cool. Next question. Do you prefer dev or ops? I think I might know your answer.
Ops is obviously my comfort zone, and I'm such a process person. But I'm finding more and more that I need to lean into the dev because those are processes that I'm starting to understand in terms of what drives businesses and what drives value. And so it's the area where I would tend to lean, but they
Hmm.
are definitely uh, inseparable. The more a company leans toward one or the other and says, "Oh no, we can have a vendor do that, or we can outsource that," um, the less healthy I think it is in the long term for that organizational culture.
Yeah, I agree with you, and this brings up something that I've had a debate with some people on. I think I even posted a thing on LinkedIn. a while back, which is, you know, having devs be aware, more concerned, or have knowledge, high level knowledge of ops things, and vice versa, right? Which, you know, in some ways, I suppose we require ops people to be more versed in the dev world because of things like infrastructure as code, right? Where you're really bringing those software engineering principles into the ops world. And yet you don't see as much of like, you meet some developers who are like, I'm just going to write my code. I don't care how it's containerized. I
Yeah.
don't care what happens after I deliver my code. What do you have any interesting thoughts on that?
I really do think that when you're a junior dev or a junior technologist, just let's take the devs and the ops out of it. When
Mhm.
you're a junior software engineer getting into it and thinking, well, which direction am I going to go in? You absolutely need to do a rotation and see what
Mhm.
actually fits your strength and your biases or your heuristics, whatever the internals that where you can lean into your strengths and get some confidence so that you can then tackle the next thing. Or recognize that, oh, okay, this is really challenging for me. You've got to be able to rotate through both. When you're dealing with senior folks who have done it a certain way, if they're able to isolate, there's not a whole lot of value in trying to pull them into from one into the other. I don't actually see the sort of dichotomy that you described. I see more of whichever one you're in because I am in
Mhm.
kind of a more split organization. And I think the bigger the enterprise, you tend to see a lot more division of labor in the roles, in the way the roles are defined.
Very true.
And I think that the folks who are, if you're in ops now, you need to have that enough of the dev to be able to function because it's moving so fast. You cannot be like me in the early 2000s with a dozen SSH terminals hitting enter just in the right sequence, because that's what you had to do without a control plane. So yeah, absolutely, the ops folks have to have that as a minimum. But I don't think that devs who want to, like software developers who are actually trying to make their product more effective, they have to be just as conscious of, at the very least, what um what their organization, what their client prefers. Because it's sort of like moving to a new country and not caring about cultural differences. It's because there are going to be some assumptions that you should know about when you start
Mhm.
thinking like, what am I optimizing for? You know, I am, like, most of my job is optimizing something, and what people don't realize, it's you can optimize for competing things. You have to remember which one you picked when you got to that fork in the road. And for a software developer who cares about speed, it might not be as important to understand how their platform that they're developing, that they're going to deploy from, operates scale, right? So yeah, I see that as being such an important way to um, grow in your own skill, is to understand how the stuff you do interacts with the ground you're standing on.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Well, thanks for sharing your take on this. Next question: do you prefer JSON or YAML?
So the JSON files that I deal with, like, on a regular basis, are things that are outputs. They're things that I read,
Right,
and I can convert it to a CSV, or depending on what the use cases and who the end user is that needs that data. It may not always be another programmer. It may not be another application that's pulling that in. It's just that's how the output came out.
right.
Mm, because we have no idea who developed that last application or that last little function that put it out. And so this is what we've got. How do we convert it to what we need? And so that's sort of been my area of dealing with it. YAML files can be tiny, and it can just be a rule set, and it can be either one is somewhat readable, but that's coming from someone who likes to read spreadsheets. So
I don't mind spreadsheets. I don't mind spreadsheets. Like I'll read like CSV if it's in a spreadsheet for like, open it in Excel. I'm good. I'm good. Okay, next question. Do you prefer spaces or tabs? Do you have a preference?
I don't have a preference. I don't even know what I think whatever the IDE is tells me which one is the one I'm supposed to use.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Two more questions. Do you prefer to consume content through video or text?
I'm one of those auditory learners. And I don't even know if I definitely need both. And I tend to put a lot of content in writing more than I would in video. But I do consume probably more video because I can do it at double speed, or podcasts at double speed, because I need to know if the information is there.
Yeah.
And while I'm looking at something else, or while I'm walking or driving, and I can process it that way. Whereas if I'm sitting down to read it, I better have time, because I think
Right.
I'm a slower reader, and reading is just never. It's never as sticky as I need it to be.
Right. Right.
But if something comes without any documentation, I will dismiss it and go to a better source. So I need documentation to sort of prove it out to me, so I can see if I would write it differently, or if my memory matches the words.
Yep, that makes sense. It's interesting what you were saying about putting podcasts on double speed. Like I love listening to podcasts. I'm a huge podcast junkie. Like I'll have a podcast on while I'm like brushing my teeth or like doing stuff around the house. But there's one thing I can't do, which is put podcasts on double speed. It breaks my brain. When I accidentally hit like the faster speed setting on my podcast, I'm like, what is going on?
On my iPhone, on the YouTube app, when I'm watching video content, I know that I can just hold my thumb down on the screen and it automatically goes to double speed. And that is probably my favorite feature of having that app on my phone.
Ah.
And it's probably comes from my impatience with people and conversations. Not this one, but
I know exactly what you mean. It's like, get to the point. I prefer reading over video, and for similar reasons. I feel like when I watch a video, I need to like carve out time, but I'm also like too ADHD to pay attention to the video. And for reading, I love skimming, and it's like, okay, just get me to the point where I need to get to.
I think maybe growing up in a household where two languages were spoken, but not by me.
Mhm.
I heard Tagalog. My parents are Filipino. I heard it spoken a lot, and often directly to me and my siblings, but I didn't have to respond in it. I responded in English. So I think because maybe that set my brain up to be really sensitive to, are they talking to me? And so the way that a word is said, or I listen to tone, and I love video too, if it's like this, where I can actually look at you and say, okay, the head nods and the body language, but where the video is something on a stage far away, I'll listen to audio only, and I will minimize that screen and just not even pay attention to the slides. I'll just be listening for for tone and words that I have not heard before, or words that are
Right.
used in a way that I'm not used to using them. There's so many reused and overused terms, just from, are you talking about the function or the application vendor that just came out with a new thing?
Right.
And they will have used the same term. I can't think of one right now.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean, and that of course adds to that adds to confusion. Okay, final question. What's your superpower?
I thought about this one a lot because I hear it. I think I've heard people ask it, and I've been asked for a long time. And I think when you're asked in an interview, you try to think of something to impress them. I think that superpowers come from recognizing what your vulnerability is that makes you different, and understanding all of the ways that you can use it to make everything else you care about doing, um, make that better. And I think that I have landed on the same one that I used to use, which is invisibility. Because sometimes when I'm in a room, people don't realize that I'm listening and gathering information. And recently I heard being invisible being compared to uh, the CIA. They're not supposed to be visible. They can't really do their job gathering intelligence if they're super visible. Um,
Right.
I think in the observability space and in my area, the FinOps space, um, we don't want our tools and our processes to be in the front. They should just be quietly doing their jobs. And I think that that's kind of how I've spent a lot of my career, is just quietly doing the job and
Yeah.
learning and understanding when I needed to adjust. And so that invisibility has let me go into spaces and make observations that maybe I wouldn't have been able to before. And
Right.
when I learned to sort of turn it on and turn it off, that's when it became a superpower. When I learned to start being visible, start using my voice, in fact, that's when I realized, oh, this is actually a strength.
Wow, I love that so much. I First of all, I love your definition of what a superpower is. That's amazing. And secondly, invisibility. I think that's the first time we've had that on the podcast, and it's so true. There's something to be said about just being the quiet listener, and then, as you said, to be able to turn it off and on as needed. Because I think being the quiet listener shouldn't be confounded with being too afraid to speak up, um, which unfortunately, a lot of us get caught up in that. Especially, I have to say, especially for women. I feel like I have to sort of just remind myself, like I have a seat at the table. I deserve to be here. I should speak up if I have something to say.
It is intertwined with uh, the imposter syndrome that people say, oh, you've got imposter syndrome, or that label that we put on ourselves, when really something about um, growing up kind of being taught to be invisible, you would think that that's a very negative thing. But
Hmm.
everyone, all of my ancestors, my elders who taught me to not be visible, did it from a place of love. They did it from a place of wanting me to be protected, from not wanting to stand out in a way that, as women, as um, sometimes coming from marginalized communities, uh, just speaking up and having an opinion can have us be perceived as threatening or disruptive, when actually, that different perspective is something that it might make you better if you can listen to it, if you can
Yeah.
hear, find some new wisdom, and in our respective fields, the intelligence that the business actually needs.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And there's something to be said for like just sitting down, listening, taking in the information before you do something with it, right? Because I think we tend to see a lot of like, you hear blah and it's like, I got my response ready to go, right? It's like, let's pounce on that right away. And it's like, no, let's listen to the story. And to be fair, I think it's an acquired skill, right? Listening is an acquired skill. I think it comes naturally to some, but to most, it's probably very difficult because we want to say we have opinions on things, right?
It can be learned and it can be practiced. And I think that, you know, I mentioned I surround myself with left-handers, but I also am kind of disproportionately surrounded by extroverts. And so as an introvert, I have to practice the skills that extroverts just find natural and, you know, don't understand why I didn't speak up earlier in my career or when I thought that speaking up would make me um, vulnerable. And well, you've just gotta assert yourself. You gotta be outgoing. You've got to make those connections. And really, it didn't serve me, or I knew it wouldn't serve me because I hadn't had the practice. And it was only, I think, when I felt called to do my part as a senior engineer on a team where, you know, we'd had some women rotate in and sort of leave and never be heard from again. You know, I was looking around and thinking, wait, why is there only one of us in a room at a time? Why are there only one or two of us at a really bigger room at a time? And what am I doing or not doing
Yeah.
to reach out and make those connections and have and let them know that they're not alone and that their opinions do matter. And also connect with them and see if they're experiencing something that I experience sometimes, which is having an opinion heard and not really valued until someone else says the same thing.
Right? Yeah, I think that's the most aggravating thing ever.
And when I started speaking out, because I had a little bit more job security, a little bit
Mhm.
more confidence in where I was at in my career, when I started, you know, talking about my experiences and saying, "Hey, yeah, this happens, just happened to anyone else in the room," and to have a bunch of women say, "Oh, yeah, that's happened to me," that sort of reinforcement told me I'd been quiet too long, and I'm not gonna do that anymore. So it was a sort of new set of skills that helped me get out of the um, timid, sort of natural comfort state of being quiet and listening, and say, okay, this this is where it becomes a superpower. This is where if I don't use my voice, no one else is going to, because no one else in the room thinks it's safe, or no one else in the room has actually experienced it because I'm the only woman, or I'm the only brown person, or I'm the only
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm the only one who's 5 foot tall walking around with a bunch of giants.
I feel that so hard. Yeah, I'm like 5'3", so and it's sometimes daunting. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but like, you know, when you have the floor and you're speaking in an audience, like not even necessarily like in front of large audience, but like in a meeting room, and all of a sudden like people are paying attention to you. I don't know. Sometimes in my head I'm like, oh shit, they're all listening to what I have to say. Oh crap, what if I say something stupid?
Oh, I mean, it happened earlier in this call. You were asking a question. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have so many thoughts. I didn't want to get my answer wrong because I feel like this might be the only time they hear me say it, so I want to say it right. Uh,
Yes, yes.
and I think I don't know how long you've been doing public speaking, but I've only maybe the last 5 years, 6, um, if that. And really, you know, the smaller groups are always where I'm more comfortable. Please don't put me on a big stage. If you do, I'm gonna call it out that I'm nervous and that my heart is beating. Could you come back to me? That's happened. It's on. It's on YouTube somewhere.
It's daunting. I mean, like, especially when you're like not mentally prepared for certain interactions. Like I was there was a panel I was moderating a couple of weeks back, and one of the panelists turned to me and like asked a question to me. I'm like, I'm going and panic set in. I'm like, I'm going to defer the question to somebody else to answer, because I wasn't prepared to be called on. And then of course then for the rest of the evening, I'm like, oh my God, do they think I'm an idiot? Like, did I do something wrong? What if people hate me?
There are definitely moments where that pressure is like physically, it puts that lump in my throat.
Yep, yep.
I can always hear my voice shaking. And so, let's take the breath. And I realize that's exactly the signal that I need to tell me, keep going, because this is important.
Yes, yes. Yeah, absolutely. And you've touched upon like two interesting things that have actually come up in previous conversations on this podcast. One, I had a guest talk about like reframing nervousness, that when you're nervous before giving a talk, it's a sign that you care, that you care enough about what you're doing. And I think that's such a lovely way to reframe it and put it into a different perspective, to almost like calm you down too. I guess it has a soothing effect. And then the other one is the idea that, um, as someone who is in a minority group, it's so important for others who look like us to see us. So it's almost like extra important for us to get past our fears and do this not just for us, but to inspire others. And the cool story around that one is that the guest who was telling me that, I had another guest on who was inspired by that same woman, who said, like, I'm doing this to inspire others. And she was one of the people who was directly impacted by that person. And as she's telling me this, it just sent shivers down my spine. I was like getting all emotional, because I'm like, this stuff matters. We're seeing direct impacts of this.
Every time. And by the way, some of your guests are like just phenomenal. And were you on something with Charity Majors
Yeah, yeah.
and Kelsey Hightower?
Yeah, I've had Kelsey Hightower on. I've had Charity Majors on. I've done a couple of panels with Charity as well.
And people who like thinking of people who whose content randomly came in my feed as I was trying to, get up to speed on this whole new cloud thing.
Mm-hmm.
Those are voices. Oh, Liz Long Jones. So just listening to those people talk about not just what they know, and not in a way that people can't connect to it and access, like the understanding underneath it, but also saying who they are, and that they didn't get here how you think they did.
Yes.
Are different ways to get in the room, and different strengths that a team needs to really achieve that really high goal, and different talents and perspectives and all those things. And Adriana, that's why you inspire me, by the way. So
Oh, thank
everything,
you.
like sharing the mic, sharing the platform is, I think there are folks on your in your episode list that I otherwise would never have thought of following, or would never heard of, because they're just like, they're not in my ecosystem.
Mhm.
And so it just like, wow, what a great exposure. And like to also say there's not just one way for folks to grow in tech and in life and in their professions. So there's not one way to succeed, and there's not one way to have an impact. Like not all of us are head of technology or the, you know, distinguished engineer.
Yep.
But we're all human.
Yep.
We all put in the hours and the sweat, and we all care that hard.
Yes, yes. That, sums it up so nicely, and, like, when I was younger, I used to, like, chase titles, and I used to compare myself against people, like, for a while there, my husband and I used to work at the same company, and then I left and he's still there. And people that we knew mutually, he'd be like, oh, this person got promoted to manager. And I remember getting so steamed about it and, like, just genuinely pissed. And he's like, I'm not going to tell you anymore because you get pissed off every time, because I was so jealous. I'm like, why am I not being promoted to manager? And then I came to this realization in my career, when I finally did become a manager, where I'm like, I don't like it. And there are other ways to, like, be a leader without
Yes.
being a manager. I realize, like, for me personally, I love digging into the weeds of tech,
Yeah.
and managing people just isn't fun for me. So once I let go of that and just I gave myself permission to enjoy what I enjoy, and just, like, things took off for me. You know what I mean?
So for me, like all of the things that I liked about being in management in my previous life, um, it turns out I would have done if they paid me for it or not. And so I could actually keep doing it. I like the mentoring. So
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
reach out when I find a group that is looking for mentors and I volunteer. I
Yes.
I love doing that with a group that's no longer around, Portland Women in Tech, and oh man, I miss that community. But there are other um there are plenty of other communities that are still looking for mentors. I have mentees now that, currently are currently in an engagement, um and I liked the strategic thinking, the systems thinking. I like thinking of systems. And it turns out I'm going to do that anyway, whether I'm an individual contributor or a manager. And it turns out that I can actually help my leadership in ways that they didn't realize. And I can remind them that, hey, it's not just me, someone who's had a couple of decades in infrastructure, that you should listen to. You should also be listening to some of your junior engineers or your mid-level engineers who are pretty quiet. They might actually know a little bit about why your systems are working the way they are and help you make better strategic decisions or have a better strategic um, visibility on what your actual risks and opportunities might be. And again, it goes back to being able to turn it off and turn on with the invisibility. It's
Mhm.
that's one of those areas where a thing about being invisible is you can recognize other folks who are using it as a shield
Yeah.
and who have a lot of um superpower, lurking underneath, and you can help them. And I think that's one of my favorite things about being a mentor is most of my mentees, I've learned so much more from them than they I think they could have learned from me, because all I do is I help them find their own strengths, and all I can do is show them that yes, you still have a lot more experience you need to gain. Yes, you're going to get a lot of feedback that kind of hurts your ego a little bit because uh, you didn't come out perfect, but take those things as growth. That's why they call them growing pains, and it's a great way to be able to connect those management activities or the things that I liked about it into my daily work, and like keep recharging me for for the spreadsheets and JSON files that I have to just deal with, and that I actually enjoy, for myself. But you know, um, the thing about management is if you're going to be a manager, you've got to be really understanding of what your organization's strategic direction is, what its vision is, what its values truly are, and decide, are you aligned enough to be able to represent that as a manager? Are you aligned enough to be able to um, make the company's priorities your own in terms of how you speak?
Yep.
And as an individual contributor, it's so much more liberating to be
Yes.
able to, I can even mentor up, which I think is just part of being an expert in your field. Is you can show folks who are miles above your pay grade how to do a new thing and
Yeah.
how to create some value.
Yeah, and I think you make such an important point when it comes to mentoring, that I think if you're not learning anything from your mentees, then I think you're doing it wrong. Because honestly, like, coming in with this attitude of like, I am the authority on all the things and you shall listen to me, like, give
Oh
me
my
a
god.
break.
But I felt the same thing you did though too about the unfairness of how management, how promotions were handed out. And by the way, I also it was completely obfuscated to me early in my career that there was another way to get promoted without going into management.
Yes, exactly. Me too.
Right, and not just promoted, but compensated,
Mhm. Exactly.
enriched. Like we grow in different ways. Like I didn't talk like this. I wouldn't have been able to talk like this had I stayed in management because I could have only spoken what I was allowed to speak. Whereas now the views and opinions that I express are my own.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a different vibe. I remember at my last management position, my boss was trying to groom me for a director position, and he said something which you touched upon, which is, you're going to have to put your personal goals aside and really focus on the company goals. And I'm like, I'm not ready for that. It's not to say, like, when you're working, of course you have, like, your paycheck comes from somewhere. It doesn't mean like, screw the company goals, I don't care. That's not it at all. But I think it's a different level of like really putting the company needs above your own professional needs when you're in these higher positions. And for me, I think it takes a bigger mental load as well. Like, it's a big mental toll.
Oh, ego too.
Oh,
Okay,
yes.
I think a thing that newer software engineers and technologists of all kinds, really just anyone who kind of comes in from their college degree into their tech role, um, has in common is they're used to excelling, probably
Yes.
at the top of their class up until K through 12, or I, I don't know how it is in Canada, but
Yeah, same, same, same.
yeah. So then like you're a freshman in college, and that's probably the first time in a long time that you're among all stars. Oh no,
Yes.
it's going to be
Yes.
harder to stand out as the top 10% of the class, top 3% of the class, because now this is the smartest people I've ever had all in one place. And so then maybe you get a little more humility and you've got a few years to build that back up. And if you're an extrovert, even easier. Um, or if you're not, then you sort of lag further and further behind. I never thought I'd be in tech when I started out electrical engineering, and I for lack of better words, washed out. It didn't fit uh,
Mhm.
at the time. At the time, but I I took a different fork where I thought, okay, well, here's where I can start kind of building some value, and it's fine. But everything that every next role just kept bringing me back and bringing that confidence back. But it brought me back to that feeling of, oh yeah, this is what it's like to be around smart people again.
Mhm.
And that, okay, so I shouldn't say that with too much humor, because that was actually my attitude. I really enjoyed judging people for not being as smart as me, when really we're all smart at something. And when you're told you need to be smart about this in this way, and that's the only way to do it, you believe them when they tell you you're not smart. So for anyone who thinks, I could never write code, I could never uh, administer that cluster, I could never do FinOps, try it. You might actually have a strength that you haven't, that you haven't actually discovered in yourself. And that's when you can unlock it. And that's when you can say, okay, it's not about the smart people and the not smart people. It is really about people showing up with the strengths that they have got and the willingness to grow and have each other's backs. And that's how you build teams. That's how you make sustainable operations. That's how organizations become resilient. And, we keep learning from each other. I learn so much from you. I really do. I
Oh, thank you.
will tell not in the observability space, but in the way that all data is in some way, you can use it as telemetry
Mhm.
to just tell you, like, is this the right signal? Am
Yes.
I in the bounds? I can't see my boundaries. This helps me understand what the bottom and the top looks like, and whether or not I'm moving in the direction that I intended to. It's the same thing with FinOps data, which is basically cloud cost data. It's just data analysis. It's a lot. It's coming at you fast. So you've got to be able to sometimes listen to things at double speed, but you're not like, it's not anything new. It's not more than the thing that you're just willing to show up and care about. Like, if that's the thing you care about, if observability is the thing you care about, if security is the thing you care about, learn how to do it right. Learn how other people do it differently from you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, you've touched upon so many really cool and important points. I think first of all, as you said, like y- coming from like high school and being the smartest person in your high school, and then kind of coming back to reality when you're surrounded by all these other people in university who are like, oh damn, that person's way smarter than me. It's such a humbling experience. I think it's an important experience. um, and I think for me, one of the biggest lessons was learning that it's okay to not be the smartest person in the room. In fact, I never want to be, because I always want to keep learning. And then the other thing that I thought of too is, one of the struggles I had when I entered the workforce was, I was a great student, but I was such a shitty employee because I didn't know it's a different skill set to be an employee versus a student, right? Like as an employee, there are expectations of being, more of a self-starter, and as a student, especially, the unfortunately, I don't think that the education system is really geared towards independent thinking. And so it becomes a shock when you enter the workforce, because it's like, tell me what I need to do. Or, like, I don't know, I just, everything, it was a different vibe.
Really.
And I sucked at it. And once I learned how to navigate the workforce, and I wish there were more opportunities for people to navigate the workforce before they graduate from high school or university or whatever. Then it became a lot better, but it was jarring for me. I sucked at it.
Yeah, I think that's where, and it's again easier, I think, for extroverts to find other folks to give you that feedback of, like, is this normal? Like, is it okay that I had to build my own dev environment and my own sandbox and without any like parameters or guardrails? Like, is that okay? Or or should I, say something and try to make it better for the next one who comes in?
Mhm.
Because there's
Yeah.
going to be someone, I'm going to get experience and I'm going to learn how to use these tools quickly and tear them down, rebuild them, with just the muscle memory in my finger knuckles. And but maybe I should document this somewhere or correct the existing document and
Yes.
and say, actually, the next person who does this is going to have to at least know to ask these questions before they say, "Oh, that's the one, that's the compressed file that whoa, it's going to work for me."
Yep.
No.
Yeah, I feel you. I do want to pivot to one more topic before we wrap up because we are coming up on time. But you've mentioned FinOps a couple of times, and for those in our audience who aren't familiar with FinOps, can you give like a brief overview and also how you got into it?
Oh, so uh, I think I got into it. Well, I'll explain what it is first, and it is commonly described uh, as financial operations, and that's actually not completely accurate. FinOps, if it's used by a person in finance and accounting, is exactly that, financial operations. Maybe it's
Mhm.
reporting, maybe it's journal entries, maybe it's something in the finance processes. It's not actually what Cloud FinOps is. It's more of a portmanteau of the terms finance, financial management, and DevOps. So taking sort of the cultural principles of that collaboration and that mutual accountability, um, from uh, from more technical spaces into this business management of technology space. That's what FinOps is. And some companies use it to just control their um, their cloud spend. Just make sure that no one's spinning up gigantic clusters of very expensive instance types. And some people use it as telemetry to say this is a really efficient stack, and I need to scale that. And you know, I need to invest in this area because it's actually creating a return, creating value for my team or my organization. So it's and like I said, it's a lot like observability in that we're building intelligence with data, and we're getting data that we've had, but organizing it and making it accessible. Um, and it's really just telling us what we do, what the
Mhm.
impacts of our engineering decisions are, and how that costs more money,
Yeah,
or how our SaaS contracts are performing.
yeah. And it's something so important to take into account because I think once a lot of organizations move to the cloud, especially if you're not, if you are just a consumer of the service and not the one paying for the bill, it's easy to just like magically provision resources and just, like the Cloud Fairy brought me this Kubernetes cluster. But there's a until like you are staring at a massive like AWS or GKE bill, you're like, oh shit. Like I've gotten dinged even like on my personal GKE account where
Ugh.
I had an instance where I had a Kubernetes cluster that had like logging and monitoring enabled because that's enabled by default. Well, guess what? That ate up some massive, massive cloud costs,
Yeah.
and so now you're like, where do I? Where's the switch to turn the stuff off so that it doesn't, so that it doesn't eat up my costs?
So that's where if you bring in your FP&A or your finance partner in, or your assistant controller in and say, well, what happened? What went wrong? I don't know. There was a $50,000 spike. That would have bought me my next car.
Mhm.
But, fix it.
Yeah.
Whereas someone in FinOps who has sort of access to engineering terms and understanding of who your cloud vendors are, to be able to say, okay, here's what happened on this workload because of these events and because of these retention policies and because of these auto scaling thresholds. Uh, you left something running. You left the lights on. You left the bathtub flowing.
Yeah, yeah.
There's so many simple things that can be proactive and that we can actually govern through automation. We can say,
Mhm.
by the way, this open faucet has a time to live. This sandbox account is really important. We need to be able to allow a $50,000 spike, maybe,
Mhm.
only for about 5 minutes.
Right.
To make sure that those guardrails are in place. If your organization doesn't have someone to go through and say, okay, I'm going to invest in this technology, and these consultants say that it's going to give me this much ROI. I need someone inside who's going to actually keep an eye on it. How
Yeah.
are how are you observing it? What monitoring are you putting in place? What signals can you look for? Right? It's not rocket science. It's just it can be a lot. And I promise you there are a lot of quiet people who are quietly doing other work who would actually really excel in something like FinOps. Um, and also a lot of automation that can be put in place where I think engineers who do the IEC like get really excited about
Yeah.
writing those policies and putting those different guardrails right into the pipeline to say,
Right, right.
yeah, the CI/CD to say, okay, I'm not going to let um, the manager speaking, I'm not going to let that happen. Well, here's actually how the code will prevent that from ever happening. And
Right, right.
when you have like an understanding of what the exception process is, then like everybody can gain that intelligence from having the experience and having all the context. Um, it's a tough thing though, because you don't always know why policies exist, and
Yeah.
if I know engineers, they want to just know how to get around them.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and you touch upon a really important point because I think it's this lack of understanding of why the policies exist pisses engineers off, and as you said, try to it causes them to try to get around it. And I think understanding where these policies come from makes a huge difference. And I think working with engineers to craft the policies, I think goes a long way as well, because then it's like, okay, I had a hand in this. And I think it brings that extra level of empathy too, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. And collaboration really is what keeps people happy in their jobs, I think. And
Hmm.
that's when you realize, oh, I did a thing and I want to work with that person again. Like I think that's the thing that makes some of our work less boring and just less isolated.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this has been really great. Before we wrap up, do you have any final parting words of wisdom?
Ooh, I think I just want to acknowledge that it's been a tough time. That we need a lot of compassion to keep uh, showing up for people we've probably never worked with before, never interacted with. To just know that uh, if you are living in a place where there are floods, or if you're in an industry or well, it's a tough time to be in tech, where you have a little less job security than you did and then you thought you would this year. Um, just having that compassion is something that it's going to be helpful to just remind ourselves to um, to know that the person who's probably giving you the most friction might have just had the worst day after a lot of bad days, and maybe be curious about that
Yeah.
so that you can keep showing up for them and keep seeing how maybe you're the person who can turn it around for them, or maybe that person's experience is something that can turn it around for you. I feel like I keep getting reminders of that really every day, and I didn't know I was going to say that, but that's the kind of week it's been.
I feel ya, and you know, thank you so much for calling that out, because I think it's really important to put stuff into perspective. Tech times are definitely strange these days, and having that little bit of extra empathy goes a long way. So thank you so much, and thank you so much, Deana, for geeking out with me today. Y'all don't forget to subscribe and be sure to check the show notes for additional resources and to connect with us and our guests on social media. Until next time,
Peace out and geek out.
Geeking Out is hosted and produced by me, Adriana Vilela. I also compose and perform the theme music on my trusty clarinet. Geeking Out is also produced by my daughter, Hannah Maxwell, who incidentally designed all of the cool graphics. Be sure to follow us on all the socials by going to bento.me/geekingout.